And November 27, 2012 marked a new beginning for ECU football when the official announcement was made that the Pirates had accepted an invitation to join the Big East Conference, which on April 3rd, or April of 2013, I should say, officially became the American Athletic Conference. And the man who announced the name change, former TV executive turned Commissioner Mike Oresko, who has become one of the leading figures in intercollegiate sports. And we are honored to have Commissioner Oresko live with us in the studio this morning. Commissioner, welcome to Greenville. We appreciate your time this morning.
Trent, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Good to have you on.
Great to see you and Billy. Thank you.
Good. No, you have a busy. Also, should thank ECU Associate AD for External Affairs, Shelley Benninger, who's also accompanying you this morning and is going to be your host, I think, for the day. I know you have a busy schedule coming up today in Greenville.
We don't want to forget Shelley. She has kept me on schedule and done a great job.
She'll do that.
Absolutely.
She'll do a great job. We know your time is limited, Commissioner, so we'll jump right into it. And then Billy has some questions as well.
Mm-hmm.
But let's start with this. Of the number of schools across the nation that deemed themselves worthy of an invitation to join at the time the Big East, now the AAC, including Conference USA schools, what separated ECU?
Well, at the time, Trent, we were looking for a football-only school. We took Tulane in all sports, and we still had the Catholic schools that were part of the old Big East in the conference, and they had preferred that we not have too many, basketball schools join as well. They just felt that at some point the league would become too top-heavy with basketball schools. So we decided that we would look for a good football program. To me, it was almost virtually a no-brainer that East Carolina would be at the top of the list because East Carolina, I knew about the football tradition here. I knew how good they'd been over the years. Years ago, I don't know if you're aware of this, Dave Hart and I put a deal together in 1991 through 96 for all ECU football games on nationally on ESPN. And that was a big deal at the time because ESPN was the flagship network, and ESPN2 didn't even exist. So if you were on ESPN, that was a really big deal. And I felt this program, had Ernest Biner, it had a lot of good seasons, tremendous fan interest. I came down here, Dave was an old friend, and I realized there was something special going on here. It was that simple. And I thought, great fan support, 40 or 50,000, essentially every game. And I thought, why don't we see if we can? You're an independent. Why don't we see if we can't put your 6 home games on, 5 home games, whatever it was at the time, on ESPN nationally? And we did it, and great exposure for the program. So I knew that this was a top football program. I also knew that it was a university that had good leadership and also wanted to be competitive in all sports. I mean, eventually I thought, you never know, you might accept the school for basketball and Olympic sports. But at the time it was a football only. And then, of course, subsequently, the Catholic 7 decided that they wanted to go off on their own. They were small schools that played basketball, didn't want to be rocked by the vicissitudes of conference realignment, thought more was coming. As you know, that was a really unsettled period. It seemed like there was a rumor a week, and when that happens, of course, everything tends to get magnified. So in any event, they left. And at that point, it was also pretty much a no-brainer to take East Carolina in all sports. Again, it's a great university. Steve Ballard and Jeff Comfort give it real leadership. Steve's obviously been the president now for roughly 10 years, and I just knew what an important university it was to the state, and I knew nationally that once it got the attention it deserved, people would realize what was here.
Commissioner, certainly with UConn this past season winning both the men's and women's national basketball title gives precedence to a conference that is pretty good at basketball, the AAC, the American Strong. In regard to football, which of course is the driving sport, I think, for all the conferences, and when you talk to Power 5 conferences, of course, you think football. Mm-hmm. Are you confident that the football schools are in place now in the American to bring this conference up to the caliber of play and to the level that those other conferences are currently at?
I do. I still think it's a project. It's still building. I don't think there's any question about it, but we're getting there, and we'll be very close. Basketball, we knew we'd be good right away. When we had 5 teams in the top 25, suddenly I had a lot of writers calling. We had a lot of media paying attention. And I did a lot of interviews, and people would sort of act like we had a bunch of Division II schools that had somehow decided to play basketball. And wow, or how would we be this good so quickly? And I said, fellas, we had UConn, Cincinnati, Memphis, SMU with Larry Brown's ahead of schedule. I said, this is a really good basketball league. Temple isn't even as good as they'd been. They had 6 straight tournaments. So I said, we're going to be pretty good in basketball. I knew that right away, and you have that tradition. In football, though, we have a lot of potential. And, potential can be potential, unfortunately. It doesn't always develop. But ours is developing quickly. You saw what UCF did with an opportunity to have exposure. They're a terrific program, and it's not getting any worse. Georgia is building that program. In addition, when you have schools like Cincinnati and Houston and now East Carolina coming in, USF's had some difficulty, but they're going to come right back. Willie Taggart's a good coach, and USF is a big program. We have schools that are all trying to get there, and I think they all have the resources to do it, and I think they can be competitive. It's not easy to compete with the Alabamas, the Michigans, the USCs, the
Sure.
Oklahomas, the Texases. It's not easy for the teams in those conferences to compete with them. It's not just us. On the other hand, if you're smart and you recruit well and you develop your program, you can do it. Look what Utah did. Look what Boise did. I don't know why we couldn't do it. We have more resources. And look at the markets we're in. And one trump card I think we do have that we've talked about a lot is the TV deal. We don't have the revenue that the other guys have in their TV deals yet, but we did a short-term deal because we knew we were unstable at the time. We knew we were in turmoil. You're not going to get the best TV deal at the time, but what we got was a deal that affords incredible exposure. Essentially all the games are on either ESPN platforms or a handful on CBS Sports Network. We've got the two best media companies in the world working with us, and we have, for instance, we've already got 6 announced games for East Carolina
Right.
on ESPN platforms this year. They've had 3, I think, the last few years, and 2 were bowl games. So regular season, suddenly all this exposure. UCF had essentially all their games on last year, and they played a few Friday nights, got a lot of exposure, beat Louisville on Friday night. Build your brand, build your program. The country's going to discover ECU in a way they haven't before.
Well said. 15 before the top of the hour. Commissioner Mike Oresco of the American Athletic Conference joining us here on Talk of the Town. Billy?
Mike, it seems like the conference realignment thing has settled down once again, but it seems like every 6 months or a year or so it gets active again, and there's so much movement in conference realignment. Everybody in every sport in the United States wants to make the best move for their school. Do you feel like it's kind of settled down, or do you feel like there at any time there could be another team that jumps ship and then it could once again begin the domino effect?
That's an important question, Billy. I think that, to be honest, it has settled down. There's no last 2 falls ago, two years ago, there were rumors percolating constantly. There was an unsettled feeling. I was, I think, a week into my tenure when Notre Dame left, and before I took the job, I'd heard some rumors that they were talking to some conferences, and a lot of people said, well, nobody's going to do what the Big East did and take them in just basketball and Olympic sports. Well, I thought, well, the world's changing, and probably somebody might consider it. And they left about a week in, and then we kept hearing rumors about other schools. We didn't know who they were, and of course, it surprised everyone when Rutgers ends up in the Big Ten.
Right.
And Maryland, a charter member of
Right,
the ACC,
of the ACC.
Goes. And so consequently, we knew we'd probably take a double hit on that one because we knew the ACC would come looking for one of our teams. And John Swafford, as an old friend, did call and say, look, we're going to take only one team. And ultimately, we didn't know whether it would be Louisville, possibly Connecticut, and they ultimately took Louisville. To answer your question, I think it has settled down. I'm not a prophet, and it could happen again in no time, but the Big 12 has said repeatedly they have no interest in expanding. They like their round robin. They play a round robin in football and basketball. They're obviously making plenty of money in their TV deal. They share it only 10 ways. They've got the stability they didn't have a few years ago. If you look at the other conferences, they're pretty big now. They've got to consolidate what they have. Notre Dame's kind of a linchpin. If nobody really knows what Notre Dame's doing, then there might not be.
They just kind of set their own rules.
Yeah, and there might not be a lot of movement because, if you're the ACC or the Big Ten, you don't really know what's going to happen. Now, again, as I said, I'm not a prophet. I don't know if something could happen. But if you talk to anybody in college sports right now, this is the most settled it's been in 5 years. And a lot of people think it could go this way for another 5, even 10 years. And what I've said to our people is, look, let's not worry about it. Let's build this conference. You could be here and people can build this thing. We've only got a 6-year TV deal. Let's see if we can get it extended. Let's see if we can start getting the money that we're really clearly showing we're worth. We proved a lot more value this year than anyone thought we would. So I think, conference realignment was driven by football, no question about it. But, at some point you have to consolidate. And at this point, everybody is pretty much, I think there might even be some fatigue with it all. And I think it probably has slowed down.
Along those same lines, do you feel like now, I think it's fair to say that for commissioners, for ADs, a job responsibility of theirs now with conference realignment is to be in a position to be ready for something to happen, whether it be a conference coming after school already in your league or you having to go out and reach out to someone else. Is that a responsibility now of yours that you have to feel like, I have to be ready for whatever may happen? Or are you thinking about that at all?
Very good question. Yeah, you have to. You have to have a contingency plan. And by the way, after what happened to us about a year and a half ago, I wouldn't be fazed by it. I mean, I would take it very seriously, but it would not be at all daunting. We'd know what we would have to do. And by the way, there are some schools out there. We don't talk about expansion because we're really not interested in expanding right now. We're going to have 12 teams when Navy comes in next year. It's a good group of schools. We can really build this thing. Everybody in this league is trying to win. Everybody in this league has the resources to win. They'll get the exposure they need. But in our case, we know that there are a few schools that would probably add value to the league. I never talk about particular schools and names, but everybody can guess which ones they might be. And down the road, who knows? But we're really, Jim Delaney a few years ago said that they were alert, but they weren't in an active mode. And I think you have to be alert. You have to kind of wonder what's going on. But the other thing is, as long as you have some contingencies. And by the way, there are plenty of schools that would want to join our conference. They view us as the next closest to the other five. And I think we're going to position ourselves, guys, as 5+1, and eventually we want to knock on that door and become known as a Power Six. When I was on the podium at the Final Four, one of the writers said to me, "Well, what do you think in terms of the so-called Power Five?" And I said, "Well, tell the kids on the podium they're not a power team. They just won the national championship." When I was on the Fiesta Bowl podium, tell UCF they're not a power team. They just beat the Big 12 champion. They didn't just beat a Big 12 team. They beat the champion, and they beat them convincingly, as you saw. So I said, tell them they're not a power team in a power conference. I said, if you win and you prove yourself, this is America. There's upward mobility. You can move into that echelon. This league has 6 teams that were there. We had 4 from the old Big East and 2 that were in the Southwest Conference, Houston and SMU. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They know what it's like, and eventually they want to get back.
Not sure when you were here last in Greenville, but now that you are the commissioner of the American Athletic Conference, now being back here, I think you've been here for a couple of days now. How impressive are the new facilities that you've seen in terms of the expansion to Dowdy-Ficklin Stadium, what we've done with the practice facility for basketball, the makeover of Minges Coliseum to a certain extent? Talk about what you've seen since you've been here over the last couple of days.
Yeah, I got in yesterday afternoon, Trent, and I have not seen the facilities yet, but I've been around the parts of the campus, and it's beautiful. I mean, Steve Ballard's just done a wonderful job, and I love the way, the red brick, has been preserved, and the way the plan of the university, it's bigger, it's more extensive than when I was here last. And again, I haven't been here in a while. I'm going to see the facilities today. I'll see the Dowdy-Ficklin, and I met Mr. Dowdy in Orlando when we announced the Cure Bowl. He happens to live in Orlando, so I enjoyed meeting him. And I'll get to see the baseball facilities, some of the basketball, the Coliseum. And again, let's not overlook basketball. Jeff Lebo will do a great job here.
Indeed.
And he really will. And I think the basketball has a lot of growth potential when you've got UConn coming in Cincinnati and Memphis and Larry Brown and now Calvin at Houston, Calvin Sampson. I think that raises all boats. I mean, everybody has to compete at that level, and I think East Carolina fan interest will be greater in this conference. We won a national championship. We're going to compete for national championships. SMU this year is going to be loaded. They've got the great young player coming in addition to a veteran team, and you've got Larry Brown. So I think basketball, let's not overlook that as well. Plus, you have a great baseball program here. I know you're in the process of hiring a coach. Used to be, a top 20 or 30 program, slipped a bit, but can come right back. And I want to see the facilities, and we might even think about a baseball tournament here someday in the conference. It's funny how, a year and a half ago, guys, nobody really necessarily knew what we had. And, of course, the news was more about the Catholic 7 leaving or Boise leaving and San Diego State leaving, which in the end, that was a plan that probably was a little shaky, the idea of having teams all over the place. Not that you couldn't have a Western, grouping in a football conference. But, if you look at us now, we became more attractive overnight. Suddenly Orlando made a tremendous bid, very aggressive bid for our basketball tournament. Hartford stepped up, and we're going to be there this year. So I think everything about this conference is on the upswing. There's a real sense of optimism, a real sense of energy, and I think East Carolina is going to be a big part of that because this is a great university. The country's now going to see it. They're going to see the facilities, see the passion of the fans. I was down here for the the festivities around the spring game a few times over the years. And again, there's just a lot of excitement here.
If you're just joining us right now, it's the commissioner of the AAC, or the American, I should say. I want to call it the American, not the AAC. Mike Oresco joining us here on Talk of the Town 23 before the top of the hour. Billy?
Yeah, Mike, I got a question. We talk about national championships. That's what everybody strives for in any conference, any school is national championships. You've accomplished that with UConn on the basketball side. On the football side, how important is a national football playoff system, which is starting to be implemented in college football, to allow conferences like this to have a shot and maybe expand that to maybe a 6 or 8 team playoff system to have a shot at a national championship in the sport of football?
It's going to be an interesting new world that we're entering. I think the 4-team playoff will probably be with us a while. I don't know that there's any real, impetus for expanding it to 8 at this point. I think we're going to have to see how it plays out. It's going to be a hard slog for anyone to try to get there. It's going to be hard no matter what conference you're in. But I also think you have to be realistic. 4 teams. You're dealing in our conference. You're competing against obviously some pretty tough teams.
Mm-hmm.
Teams like the SEC puts a few teams up in the top 10 every year. As you know, I televised programmed SEC football for 16 years at CBS, and I know the strength of the league. And the Big Ten's got some fine teams, and obviously the Pac-10 has emerged the last few years. Big 12. ACC with Florida State now and Clemson. It's not going to be easy. On the other hand, if you look at UCF, now Blake Bortles and Storm Johnson left, but had they stayed, you're looking, and they had eligibility left, you're looking at a top 5 or a top 10 program.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Let's assume that they were to go, let's say 12-0 in our league. We don't have a championship game this year.
Right.
But let's assume that UCF, they play BYU, they play at Missouri, and they play Penn State in Ireland. It's going to be a lot of fun at the beginning of the year. Let's say they win those games and they go undefeated. Are you really going to keep them out of a 4-team playoff after what they did in the Fiesta Bowl last year?
You just got to figure what happens with the SEC, because over the landscape of college football, an 11-1 or a 10-2 even SEC team is going to get a lot more attention than a 12-0 team out of the American, just because it's the SEC, the power and the prestige of the AC or the SEC. So you got to wonder how hard will it be even for an undefeated team out of an American.
Won't be easy. Won't be easy, Billy, but on the other hand, I don't think there are going to be that many undefeated teams. And by the way, we're going to build this league to the point where a 1-loss team will have a lot of credibility, because UCF last year lost by 3 points to South Carolina, one of the better teams in the SEC. So if you look at the path is narrow for everyone, but there's a real opportunity. And what we're going to do in terms of communications, in terms of PR, and PR doesn't replace performance, but if I've got a team in this league that's performing, we're going to make sure people know, and we're going to say, why don't they deserve it? Look at the Fiesta Bowl. We were the biggest underdog in the history of the BCS, and look what happened in the game. These are good teams. These are teams that have good, solid programs. Now, we also have the ability to get into one of the host bowls. Now, I'm not quite sure how the name host bowl came about,
right.
But those are the 3 games that don't involve the contract bowls. Obviously the Rose, the
Fiesta.
The Fiesta, the Cotton, and the Peach are the host bowls,
right? And
the Orange, and then the Cotton and the
Sugar Bowl.
Rose. I'm sorry, the Sugar. I said I meant to say Sugar. The Sugar, the Rose, and obviously the Orange have contracts with those conferences, and that's one of the things that at this point we don't have, but we do have access. And it's going to be it's narrower than it was. Our conference was an automatic BCS qualifier, as you know. In the future, you're going to have one team from that group of 5 conferences that includes us, includes the Mountain West, includes Sun Belt, the MAC, and Conference USA. And one team, the highest ranked team, which would have been us this past year, would have been UCF, will end up in a New Year's Day or New Year's Eve game. And those are considered the Big 6, however you want to term them. Well, again, we think that we've got a realistic shot at that, and we think we're going to strive hard to get there. Not going to be easy. Also, we want to be viewed as closer to those other 5. That's the goal. And it doesn't mean that we've got to be in that game every year to show that we're a strong league, because we might be so competitive that we have a 2-loss team and it doesn't quite get there. But what we're going to try to tell people is Our league is competitive. Remember, the committee now, the selection committee, which is something new introduced to the equation, is going to look at strength of schedule very seriously. And I think they're going to take it very seriously. It's a good committee. Jeff Long's a great chair. They know what they're doing. And they will look hard at that. And they'll say, look, did you play a tough schedule? It'll be like the men's basketball committee.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Commissioner, one more and we'll let you go. Something that I know you know a lot about, something you're an expert in. But TV deals, TV in college football, what is the future of TV in college football? What else can we possibly look forward to happening? I know you have the SEC network that's on the horizon, but where do you see TV in college football going, say, 10, 15 years from now? What's going to be next?
You know, I think the internet, online, the convergence of online and TV is going to be very important. I don't know where that's going. Right now, there's not enough revenue in just online, but you have Apple and Google TV, and it's hard to say how media companies are going to evolve over the next 10 or 15 years. But I do think that you're going to see even more emphasis on live events. I mean, live events, again, somebody once said, you can't rent tonight's game, and it's the kind of thing that it's always going to have tremendous value. Now, we have a short-term deal, so we're looking to extend it out and generate some more revenue and also some more exposure, although we can hardly get any better exposure. It's really spectacular. But I also think one other thing is, you look at the landscape in TV. Some of the cable networks that are still fledgling are going to get bigger. So I think there's going to be even more competition for programming. You've got the two Fox channels. You've got NBC Sports Network and CBS Sports Network that have nowhere near fully developed yet. We're partnered with ESPN, and we love it because they've got all these platforms, and they're going to develop more platforms. Could you see an ACC network down the road? Sure, you could. Down the road, as you increase stability, we would look at possibly having some kind of network presence. We don't know what that might be down the road, and I'm getting way ahead of myself because we're still in the process of building this league, and we've got to show that we're stable and that we're competitive, and I think we will, and I think we already have. So I think those are the kinds of things you have to look for. I don't think the networks will still be a presence, although I think cable has changed the landscape dramatically because you have two sources of revenue, subscription fees and advertising, and suddenly you have these vast sums of money that weren't spent before. And one last thing. We don't know what these lawsuits are going to mean. We're really trying. We're hoping that the collegiate model gets preserved because I think that the courts would be playing Russian roulette with something that the country loves, the communities love, the schools love. I think it's a good model. I think it needs to change a bit. We're going to do more for student athletes. There's no question about it, and that's important. It's really important. It's fundamental. But I think the model is a good model. I think it works. I don't think you want it to become professional sports. But we don't know what impact these lawsuits are going to have on how TV, how we deal with that, and where the revenues go, and all that's still up in the air. I think ultimately, whether it's at the lower court or in the appeals process will prevail, but you just don't know. So that's another unknown as you look at this equation long term.
Commissioner, I know you have a busy day coming up at breakfast this morning, the media luncheon also today. Enjoy the rest of your time here in Greenville, and thank you so much for spending time with us here this morning. And I feel like we're almost indebted to you for the support that you've shown to ECU over the past couple of years, and a big reason why ECU is in the position they're in now in the American Athletic Conference. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Trent. ECU's earned it. Believe me, they really have, and we're delighted. And thank you and Billy for having me. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you.
Good to have you on. The commissioner of the American Athletic Conference, Mr. Mike Oresko.